Hey everyone, it's Nicole the Math Lady. Today I am so excited because I get to speak to what I call a very important person. So if you use a textbook that looks like this, right, you may have noticed that there are two authors' names in that bottom right-hand corner. Well, one we're quite familiar with, right? That's Saxon, John Saxon, but you might not be familiar with the other name. It says Hake. So today I have one of the co-authors of Saxon Math, Stephen Hake, who is going to be spending some time with us over the next hour or so. So, Stephen, welcome to our little show about Saxon Math.
Great to be with you, Nicole.
All right. And we had a chance to actually meet when I was in California this summer. We had such a great conversation that I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to share some information about the beginnings of Saxon Math with our community? So that's what we're going to do today. All
I'm
right.
looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right, well, let's start right there. So, again, your name is on this book. Tell us how you got connected with John Saxon and just a little bit about your background in math education.
I was teaching seventh and eighth grade students at a school in El Monte, California, and preparing all my own assignments for my students. I stopped using a book after about 1 month. When I first started teaching, the students didn't remember what I had taught them in the first chapter. So I knew immediately this wasn't going to work. So we put the books in the cabinet and I just started recreating my own assignments for all of my students. And I did that for about 8 years. And we'd go to the library to do some research and was in the periodical section in the textbook sections for math. And then as I was leaving the library in this periodical section, saw the words algebra flash before my eyes. Algebra in the periodical section? Why would there be algebra in a magazine? So I searched through the magazines, and in the lower shelf, I saw on the cover of National Review magazine the results of a field test of a new algebra book in Oklahoma City schools. So I read the article and thought, God, here's somebody out there that teaches math the way I do.
Ah,
And so I ordered a copy of John Saxon's Algebra 1 book and started using it with my eighth grade students. And after about a month, it's like I wrote him a letter. This is the first book that I've been willing to use in my math classroom in 8 years of teaching. And I've written some books that we're using in our school that for the lower grades, for fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share. I've read all the trouble that you've gone through to get your books in print. Do you have any advice for me?
yeah.
And he called me at the school about a week later and said, how about I publish those books? Which was a shock to me because I thought he's writing one book, Algebra 1 for high school students. So I said, well, how about we meet? Because he was coming to a conference in Southern California in Long Beach.
Okay.
So we met in Long Beach. After he spoke, we had a conversation. He said, I'll give you the same offer that Prentice Hall gave me when John Saxon, which he actually began writing community college, junior college level books. I'll give you the same offer that they gave me, which is you produce a manuscript I like, and I'll publish it. So about a year later, I sent him a manuscript for Math 76. It wasn't titled Math 76 at the time. It was just a manuscript for a seventh grade level book.
Yes.
And he really did like it. And so he offered me a contract. He flew out to Southern California where I live, offered a contract, and that's how it started. And I
I
thought
mean,
I had that on silent.
it's really amazing because, just for our folks who are listening, to me, that all started with your being willing to be like, let me write him a letter. Like sometimes we think, well, who am I to be able to, reach out to this person? But like, he's just another person on the planet, right? And you liked his work and you said, well, let me reach out and see if there's, See if we could just have a conversation. So look what one conversation that you had, look what it turned into. So it's
Absolutely.
amazing.
Right.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so so tell me a little bit about what you saw in that algebra book. You said, oh, this is somebody who teaches like I do. So what did you see? What did you recognize that you said, yeah, I want to be around this person's energy or whatever it is they're doing? It feels like it's similar to what I'm doing.
When you're teaching, when I was teaching, of course I wanted students to learn what I was teaching. And they would learn, but then they would forget.
Mm.
And
Which is a
so
huge
it was
problem
just
in math, right?
obvious to me from the beginning that you have to accommodate the tendency to forget. And so we have to continue to review what previously has been taught. And so that's what I was doing in the books that I was, in the materials that I was creating. They weren't really books, they were just a series of worksheets. And then, so using John's book, that was the first obvious difference between John's book and any other book, is that he's constantly practicing everything that was previously taught. So the opportunity to forget is diminished, or you forget, but then you relearn. And that's why I was happy to use his book in my classroom.
Yeah.
But as you work through his book, you find there are other subtleties that are less obvious, but just as important. You know, he was working with students that found math difficult to learn. He was teaching at the community college level. These are adults who struggled with math when they were younger, which is why they're taking like a high school level math class in community college. And so he was working with people that weren't necessarily naturally gifted in math. So he was finding out what was hard for them and accommodating that in how he was presenting the content.
Yeah.
And similar experiences for me too, teaching in the community where I taught. We had a very wide range of students, gifted students to students that really struggled. And so when you work with a wide range of students, you want to make as many of those people, many of those students successful as you possibly can. So you put in those tricks of learning, more or less, that will help the students learn what seems difficult for them.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I've been doing some conferences. Like when I met you, I was doing a conference over the summer. And one of the workshops I taught was about spiral learning, mastery learning, which, by the way, I'd never heard those words before I entered this homeschool space. Like I got educated to those words. But people ask me all the time, like, well, should I choose a mastery curriculum? Should I choose a spiral curriculum? And what I'm hearing in what you're what you're saying that you saw in John's work was, oh, wait, you're seeing built into the way he's teaching this constant review of going back because it's just part of learning that we're going to forget. So you're designing in knowing that we're going to forget how to handle that. Like that's like not like an afterthought. It's part of the design of the curriculum. Would you say?
Yes, we have a publishing business of our own where we publish a grammar and writing program. And at the beginning or in the on the website, there's a page for pedagogy. And on that page, we describe we reference an old Disney movie, Flight of the Navigator. And in that movie, a young child, maybe a 10, 12-year-old child, is captured, kidnapped by aliens, and they fly him around the universe. And they use his brain to store their star charts. Because it's such a, our brains are so efficient. And the density of is so great that they can use it. They would use a child's brain. That was the theme of the story.
Yeah.
But after a number of years, they abandoned the dream, abandoned that experiment, and returned the student to his hometown. He hasn't aged much because he's been flying around, the universe, or at least the galaxy, close to the speed of light. So he hasn't aged much, but everybody else has.
Sounds
But
like
they abandoned the
Peter
experiment
Pan,
because, they abandoned the experiment because of a flaw in this child's brain.
Yeah.
It leaks.
Oh. Oh.
It leaks information.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned on our pedagogy page, anybody that taught fourth, fifth, sixth grade students could have saved those aliens a lot of trouble, because they know that the students' brains leak information.
I think we've
And so
all,
you have
yeah.
to accommodate that in the way
Yes.
you teach if you
Yeah.
want students to remember. It's very frustrating for a teacher to spend time preparing and teaching students and then just have them forget.
Yeah. No,
So
I
you
think what
build
you
that
said is
into
perfect.
the curriculum.
You got to build it in. Well, it's probably the most asked questions we get on our customer service team is when a parent is asking for help is, we taught this on one day and it's like the next day they forgot it. And I'm like, yeah, like that's not like expect that to happen. So if you expect that to happen, I like to think of it as a layering approach. Like you just saw it today. It just softened your brain today. Tomorrow, you need to see it again. The day after that, we need to see it again. Maybe by day 4, it's starting to click. Maybe by day 5, it's starting to click. Maybe for some students, it's the 20th time they see it that it starts to click. Like I know with my son, right? I think I've shared this with you. I have a son who's on the autism spectrum, right? And it's amazing to see him learn because the ramp up from the moment we introduce a concept till he gets it is longer than for other students. But so let's say for other students, it might be 5 times that they've seen that, over 5 lessons. For him, it might be 20 times. It might be 30 times. But I will say when he does get it on that 30th time, he's got it. It's not going anywhere. It is in him. He's got it. He can now perform it. So when parents ask us what they keep forgetting and they make silly mistakes, I'm like, yes, all of that is math. Let's get used to the idea that is what math is. So we're not frustrated by it.
There are a few benefits. Well, let me first restate this. So with Saxon Publishers, we had a saying that we described our curriculum as incremental development and continual review. A little bit of instruction every day, incremental development. Yeah. Continual review, meaning always coming back to review what was previously taught. Cognitive psychologists have now discovered this method, and they're calling it interleaving. And there are many articles and videos on the internet now about interleaving, the benefits for long-term learning of interleaving, doing multiple strands of instruction at the same time, and continually reviewing what was previously taught. So what are some of the benefits? One of the benefits is long-term memory. You're going to remember it for a much longer time if you're continually forgetting, remembering. Yeah. Eventually you remember and it's locked in for the long term. Another benefit that you're practicing these different strands: algebra, geometry, arithmetic, statistics, probability, and you're starting to tie these ideas together. These aren't just like separate box cars that dump out, information, and here's another category, and then that moves on. All of these things are tied together. We're teaching this incremental development using different different strands at the same time. You're starting to see why everything hangs together. There's one, more important element that comes to mind immediately, and that is you start getting a fuller picture of the concept, because the different questions that come up in the daily practice sheets look at a concept from a little different angle each time. So you get more of a three-dimensional view of the concept instead of just a straight-on single perspective view of the concept.
Yeah.
And it gives time for students to actually get the rationale behind it. It's not just they know how to do it, but they start understanding why to do it.
Yes.
Understanding why is a higher level thinking skill than understanding how to do it. And some of the reform programs that are out there try to make understanding why a prerequisite for understanding how, for how to do it. With, Saxon, let's get students doing it.
Yeah.
Let them learn how to do it. And then over time, they'll begin to gradually understand why. Even if they don't understand why, they at least still can do it.
Right.
Whereas in some of the reform programs, they don't understand how, and they don't understand how.
Right. No, what you're saying is so important, and not just for math, like I see that all the time in like different Facebook groups. People say, well, I want my student to learn, the why behind everything, which you're right, is important. But at first, they don't need to know all of that up front. They need to just learn how to do it, how to replicate it. And as it begins to simmer and sit there, when you were speaking, I was thinking about one of those, you've seen those art photos that are done in little squares. And then when you're looking at it up close, it doesn't really look like anything, but then if you zoom back, you can see, I know I've seen one of these with Van Gogh, right? You see the entire picture, and I remember the first book that I taught on video was 7-6, right?
Yes.
And I got all the way to the end. And then I remember starting 8-7. And I remember going, oh, I get why they do it this way.
Right.
I get, that's connected to that. That's connected to that. This is connected to that. And I've always been good at math. But now I could really get the why and how math works after getting really good at the mechanics of it.
Right.
Right. It's something we can tell our parents. It's relax. It is okay. I know you want them to know the why. Let's just concentrate on them being able to replicate doing it. The why will come.
Yes. So that same parent, if they wanted their child to learn how to play the piano, would they put him in a music theory class and have them sit through a semester of music theory and then think that they could just sit down and play the piano? That's the Music Man approach, but it doesn't really work. I mean, the parents might be happy that their kids are at least pounding away at the piano.
Right. I love it. I love your examples.
Learn the basics, and eventually the how and the why will follow the how.
Fantastic. All right, let's shift now to the actual textbooks, because I've got some questions here that people have written in about certain things about the actual curriculum, the actual textbooks. So let's start with the naming convention, because I definitely, Saxon Math definitely names its textbooks, at least the homeschool line, that's what we call it, the homeschool line, a little differently than other textbooks. So for example, this one right here is called Saxon Math 5-4. People will ask us, what does that mean? Is it fourth grade? Is it fifth grade? What does it mean? Why is the 5 first? Will you tell us a little bit about how that came to be?
Sure. It began with the first manuscript that I sent to John Saxon. I didn't, as I said, when I first learned of John Saxon, I thought he was a one textbook wonder. He wrote an Algebra 1 book. But once I was communicating with him, he said, well, I've also written a book that follows Algebra 1, and I'm calling it Algebra 1.5, and a book that precedes Algebra 1, which I'm calling it Algebra 1/2. So his pre-algebra book is Algebra 1/2. And he sent me a copy of that manuscript. The book wasn't in print, but he sent me a copy of the manuscript. And so while I'm working on the my first manuscript that I'm sending to John, which became Math 76, I wrote it to precede his pre-algebra book, to prepare students for his pre-algebra book. And so he got the manuscript and he liked the manuscript and wanted to publish it. He said, well, what are we going to call it? Is it a seventh grade book? I said, well, it's more really like sixth grade content, but it goes into a pre-algebra book. Yes, but, well, for slower students, maybe, or for average students, let's say, maybe it's a seventh grade book, but strong sixth grade students could use this book. So at first you wanted to call it Algebra -1 or Algebra -1, and then Algebra -2, Algebra minus, keeping, because he was really algebra oriented.
Algebra focused, yeah.
Right. So I didn't like that title very much. So he said, well, how about we call it Math 76? For the average seventh grade, for the stronger sixth grade student. And I said, fine. So Math 76, no slash in between, became the sixth or seventh grade book.
Okay.
And then once that name was settled, then that became convention to the book that would precede that would be Math 65, and then Math 54, and working its way down. That's as far as we went initially, is 65, 76, 76, 65, and then 54. And later, Math 87 came along.
Okay.
And then that was true for two editions. And then for the third edition, I changed the design of the textbook cover, and they put in the slash between the 7 and the 6 to become Math 76 or 87. So that's the reason for the titles. It was a John Saxon negotiated title.
You've heard it here, folks, because we get that question all. What do these titles mean?
So the new titles, once John Saxon's publishing company, Saxon Publishers, was acquired by Harcourt, Harcourt we created a new edition. They're still written by the authors because our contracts, my contract with Saxon Publishers, Nancy Larson's contract with Saxon Publishers, gave us full control over the content. Full control over the content. So the publisher couldn't make changes to the content without our involvement. And actually, they didn't make any changes at all. It was all our creation. So, but they did want to change the titles, and that was fine with me. So the books are now Intermediate 3, 4, 5, which is a new third grade book, plus the Math 54 is Intermediate 4, and Math 65 became Intermediate 5. And then course 1, 2, 3, course 1 is Math 76, course 2 is Math 87. Excuse me. Course 1 is Math 76, course 2 is built on Math 87, and course 3 is a new book to be an alternative to the Algebra 1/2 book. It's a more comprehensive math book that was required by some of the states that we were preparing the program for.
Yeah.
It's still a pre-algebra book, but it's more comprehensive than that.
So let me ask you about that. So around Nicole the Math Lady, we call it the homeschool line, and we call the intermediate course 1s, course 2s, the school line. Have we made that up? Is that kind of accurate? Do you find the 8-7s, the 7-6s generally more the homeschoolers use, and the intermediates and the course 1s are generally more used by schools? Have you found that to be true?
Yes. So the intermediate books and the course books were written for the school marketplace because that's the biggest market. You're going for big school district adoptions across the country. Doesn't mean they can't be used by homeschool or families. They can. And in fact, the big homeschooler distributors do sell those programs for school use, for homeschool use.
Yes.
But the last Saxon Publishers edition was like the one that you held up, math. Uh, that was a Math 6.5,
Yeah,
Math
5.4.
7.6, Math 8.7. That was the last Saxon Publishers edition produced in around very early 2000s, say 2000 through 2004, something like that.
Yeah.
Those are in softcover. Well, when John Saxon was creating books for school use, but very early on, he told me about these families that are keeping their kids at home and teaching them at home. And we don't want them to have to buy a whole new teacher's edition to go along with the textbook. That's too expensive for them. So let's just create this little booklet that could be like a little homeschool companion that would have all the answers and have the tests. And then we can just include this thin little booklet so that it's much more economical for homeschoolers. This was as early as like 1985. So John was really interested in serving the homes, very accommodating to homeschool families right from the start. Now, in the later 90s, we're starting to have some problems because when you sell to schools, sometimes you're signing contracts saying, we will never sell this book for a lower price to any other party. But John's trying to get these books to homeschoolers, and so he's been selling them wholesale to homeschool distributors, and then the distributors sell them to the homeschool families. Well, in effect, then he was discounting from the school price to sell it wholesale to the homeschool distributors. And his attorneys are saying you could be in violation of these agreements that you've made with school districts. So you can't be selling the same product for a different price. So that's when the homeschool books started going into soft cover. So the soft cover books that you held up, well, that was fine for the homeschoolers, most homeschoolers anyway, because they didn't mind. The students could write in the book, or they could just, it's just 1 or 2 times used. They're not going to use the same book for 7 years, for like, and going into book bags and being thrown around the playground, like the hardcover books. So that's probably why it became more recognized as the homeschool edition. Might even say homeschool on the cover. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, I think it does. Well, and it does. You're right. I'm looking at it right there. It says homeschool.
Yeah, right.
But let's talk about the content, because we get asked this question a lot. The content that's in the homeschool line and the content that's in the school intermediate course 1, course 2 line. Would you say that they are mostly the same, mostly different? If they're different, how are they different?
They're identical.
Okay, the reason I'm laughing, let me tell you why. So the school line has gotten a bit of a bad rap in the homeschool world, right? And so what I do when I do my conferences, I try to clear it all up, right? And so the homeschool line is the book that most of our folks use, like I'd say the majority of our folks use, but we also do a lot of work with schools. And I would say, the textbooks that we're working with now, these later editions, maybe there's like a 10% change in some of the problems, right? So,
okay. Well, there are differences when you move from edition to edition. So,
yes. Tell us about
the first edition went to the second edition. We might be including some content. Let's say in the first edition books written in the mid 1980s, there wasn't much of an emphasis on probability and statistics, which became more of a requirement. More of a requirement from states that are looking for materials that should be in a math curriculum. So we would include more of that in like the second edition, or more pre-algebra content. Maybe we would include more of that in the third edition. And so we're gradually including more content or correcting errors that might have crept into the earlier editions. Not crept in, but were there when we published them. And so, in effect, the school edition, the intermediate and the course 1, 2, 3 would be like the 4th edition of Math 76, which became Math 76, which became course 1. It's the same content, but I mean, it's still built on the same original books that were written. Correct. But we're including more content, or we found a better way to teach something. So I would say every book every edition has been an improvement over a prior edition.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that was thrown in by the publisher, because the publisher can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Our contracts don't allow them to do that. Now, that's not true at the high school algebra, geometry, algebra 2, which we can touch on, but it's true at K through 8. At K through 8, the publisher can't tinker with the content.
Okay.
That's strictly in the author's hands, Nancy Larson's hands and my hands.
Yeah.
And so I say, if people have trusted us through Math 76 and Math 76 and why not trust us with course 1 or course 2 or course 3? Sure. It's the same content, maybe a little bit more content, a little broader content, maybe a little better instruction. So it's still perfectly fine to use those, and they are available for homeschool
and
use.
One of the differences that we have seen, there's a slight, as I said, maybe it's 10%. At the ends of each lessons, there are a few more word problems. Like there's more real world application in those intermediate. Like we just see more word problems that we see in, edition 3, edition 4, 7, 6, but it's very slight. I mean, so people, it's funny in the homeschool world, we've heard things like people assume, they've made these assumptions that the school line is related to Common Core. Now, I don't want to have a whole conversation about Common Core right now, because we could totally go down that bunny hole. But really what we tell people is, I use the same videos, because when I took that lesson, it was the same lesson as over there. And people are like, really? Like they don't, that's news to them. Is when
we should touch on Common Core. So I'll just make a quick
let's do it then. Let's touch on Common Core.
So when did Common Core? So let's first touch on what was the rationale behind Common Core originally.
Yes.
So let's make 2 different big ideas about Common Core. First big idea. Common Core, there are about 20 states, a little bit less than half the states have state level adoptions, meaning that teachers and administrators get together at that state level and decide what should be taught in math in our state. And that's happening in 20 different states. The bigger states would be like Texas, California, Florida. And so publishers are trying to accommodate what is required in that state. But sometimes the differences are so great that it's really difficult to do that. In fact, there was a time when we were creating revisions that what is required in Texas and what is required in California at the 8th grade level had 0 in common.
Wow. Yeah.
And so the idea of Common Core, which originated with the governors, was, can't we just settle on what should be taught at these grade levels? Let's just say 80%. 80% of the content would be common to all states. And then if states want to vary what happens, they have another 20% that they can modify for their own state. And so that was the original idea. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea to have some commonality of what should be taught. I mean, kids do move from Texas to California, but a lot more are moving from California to Texas.
Right.
So there should be some commonality there. Plus, we're just educating a U.S. population. So the basic idea of Common Core wasn't necessarily a bad idea. But then the federal administration got a hold of it and thought, oh, this is a good idea. We can gather information about all these students and their families, and we can do some national testing. And then it became a lot more political And then other people are jumping kind of pet content that they want to see. And that's, I think, where it started. Once it became political, then it became controversial.
Right.
So the original idea behind Common Core, maybe not so bad, but once it became like this is a federal control of education, which has been forbidden really for since there has been public education, that's when I think it started getting a bad rap.
Yeah.
And then some of the content maybe wasn't, especially in the language arts areas, because I mean, how controversial can it be for math? Well, it's becoming more controversial now, but not necessarily the original Common Core. So that was kind of like the overall big picture. Okay. But what about Saxon Math? Was that written to accommodate Common Core? So Common Core was really kind of being worked on in 2008, 2009. When Harcourt acquired Saxon, they acquired it around 2006, created new editions in 2007, 2008, before there was a Common Core.
Or Common Core, exactly.
So that intermediate 1, 2, 3 and the course intermediate 3, 4, 5 and the course 1, 2, 3, those weren't written to accommodate Common Core because there wasn't a Common Core.
Yeah.
And so what about the newest editions, the 2018 editions, which have different covers and they're still entitled intermediate 3, 4, 5 and course 1, 2, 3. How about those? I'll tell you, those are identical to the Harcourt editions of 2007, 2008. Identical. There was nothing that was changed in the lessons, the lesson sequence, the problem sets, the tests. Those are all identical.
Yeah.
The only difference between the 2007-8 edition and the 2017-18 editions is that the 2017-18 editions were written to meet adoption requirements in Oklahoma. And there were a few elements that needed to be addressed in Oklahoma. And we addressed those by going to the very end of the lesson where there was white space. And we, because we'd run out of text, there was a little white space before going on to the next lesson. And so we inserted, I don't know, 12 to 20 little paragraphs. There were maybe little exercises per book.
Yeah.
They can be done or not done. It doesn't matter.
That's the supplemental exercise.
Right. It's just, it would be considered supplemental.
Yeah.
So there is nothing that is in the textbooks that is Common Core.
Yeah.
Even though Age might advertise it as being Common Core, that's just marketing. That's just their advertising. They did create supplements.
Yeah.
And the supplements might address some Common Core elements that weren't in the textbooks. But homeschoolers don't get those supplements. Those are only for school use. So the whole controversy about Common Core is not applicable to Saxon Math whatsoever.
Yes.
True. And that's true also for our grammar and writing program at Hake Publishers. They're all done before Common Core. It's not applicable to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. Because again, we hear it all. We respond the same way, but we hear it all the time. Yes. I have another question for you that we hear. Actually, this is the most requested question that people wanted answers. Actually, no, there's two. So I'm going to give you, let's first continue talking about textbooks, and then I will get to the most requested question by our audience. Okay, let's talk about pre-algebra. 8-7, algebra half, algebra 1. What is the recommended order? Are you supposed to do all of those books? Are you supposed to start with 7-6 obviously first, 8-7, you skip? What is the right way to do it? Tell us, Stephen.
You should do Math 7-6. After Math 7-6, you should do Math 8-7. Or in other words, Course 1 and Course 2, if you're using the more recent editions. For sure. Now, some students finish Math 87 with flying colors. Maybe they're passing tests at 90% or higher. They're probably going to be successful going directly into Algebra 1.
Okay.
don't go from Math 76 or Course 1 into Algebra 1/2. Don't do that. At Math 76 to Math 87. If you're doing well in Math 87 or Math 87, then you can go into Algebra 1. If you're not doing the greatest in Math 87, then you could go into, then you have a choice.
Right.
Go into Algebra 1/2 before Algebra 1, or go into Course 3 before Algebra 1. So
Right.
think of Course 3 and Algebra 1/2 as occupying the same level.
Yes.
So you can go from Math 87, leap over that level and go into Algebra 1 if you did great in Math 87. If you didn't do great, you did okay, or maybe you struggled a little bit, then you're better off doing that next level.
Yeah.
So that's Course 3 or Algebra 1/2. My preference, Course 3. And the reason I prefer Course 3, it has all the pre-algebra content as Algebra 1/2, but it has a much broader spectrum of content as well. It's not purely Algebra 1/2. And John did write Algebra 1/2. It's not a bad book, but I feel like, he hadn't really taught at that level.
He was
I had
more
lived at that level.
students.
Yeah, I had lived at that level.
Yeah. That's
For
where
like
you guys
10
kind of
years.
met
Yeah,
in the middle, right?
right. For 10 years. So I felt like there were some subtleties that he missed, which are in his other books, that he missed at the Algebra 1/2 level because he hadn't taught at that level. So that's why, I prefer the 87 to Course 3 to Algebra 1 route for students that need that. But there's nothing wrong with going from Math 87 to Algebra 1/2 to Algebra 1. But you want to be prepared before you go into Algebra 1.
Yeah.
So if they're not getting through Math 87 with flying colors, it's better for them to either do Algebra 1/2 or what I would prefer is Course 3.
Awesome. That's what we tell people because, again, we live in a society that's like, no, but we have to stay on track. And I'm like, there is no on track. There's what where your student is at and meeting your student where your student is at. If your student is ready for Algebra 1 after 8-7, great. If they're not ready for Algebra 1, that's when we have the Algebra 1/2 or the Course 3. And that's the next step for them. They're going to need to spend a little bit more time getting that pre-algebra under their belt because they're only going to have a hard time in algebra unless that stuff gets under their belt.
That's always the way it works. If you're having trouble in algebra, it's usually because you're not as strong in the pre-algebra. If you're having trouble in calculus, it's because you're not strong enough in algebra. It's the foundation that you're building that's important. But it's not just the foundation, because when you think about real life, what you need for real life, no matter what career field you choose, the math that you need for real life is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level math. You don't really need algebra for most of your real life, but you do need that broad base of content, that broad spectrum of content that's at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level. After those levels, then the content starts narrowing down into like an algebra or a geometry, these narrower strands that aren't really as applicable to real life. So why would you want to rush through what you really need for the rest of your life?
Yes, you're making me happy there, Stephen. That's it. I mean, let's face it, most of us aren't doing calculus or trig in our everyday lives, right? I mean, there are some people who will go on to study higher level math or engineering where they need these higher math, but most of us, sales tax, discounts, interest, that's what we deal with. It's all that pre-algebra, 7th, 8th grade. So
that's part of the reason I prefer that Course 3 route to the Algebra 1/2 route, because it's more content of real life content.
Yes. Okay, let me ask you the question that is the most asked question we get everywhere. And I know you and I spoke about this when we met this summer. It has to do, you probably know, with the 30 practice problems with the mixed practice. So we hear from people, Nicole, do I have to do all 30? Can I have my kids do odds or evens? So, but it takes so long to do all 30. So let's have a conversation about that, because I've got questions and I've got follow-up questions for you in this, because I really do want to spend some time here, because this is where we spend the majority of the questions we get is around this.
What we have told schools and what we would tell individuals is, if you want to get the most out of the program, if you want your students to be successful, if you want your children to be successful, then you have to follow the program with fidelity. Faithfully follow the program. And what does that mean? Do every lesson in order. Don't skip any lessons. Do all the practice problems for that lesson. Don't skip any practice problems. And when you get to the review set, do all the problems in the review set and don't skip any of the problems in the review set. If you do that, your child will learn, or your student will learn, and they will be successful. And when you get to the test, if your child drops below 80% on the test, make sure that they really understand the content, go over the test very well. If it looks like there's any weakness, back up, do those most recent lessons again. And because if they start dropping below 80% on the test, pretty soon they're below 70, then below 60, they become overwhelmed by all the new content. So that's the following the program with fidelity. And homeschoolers can do that because there's no requirement for them to complete the book by June 1st. If it goes into July or August, poor child, but at least they're continuing to get through the program. If you're going, remember, we're practicing all the topics all the time. So why would you want to skip practice? Well, they already know that. Well, okay, but they'll learn it better. Part of the Saxon, the miraculous way that it works is by overlearning, by learning it so well that you hardly even have to think about some of these routines. You're just automating these basic routines. And so it doesn't take them long to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So yes, they might get bogged down on some things, but you just have to expect it's probably going to take about an hour. For the grammar and writing program, it doesn't take as long as it does for the math. We have found that they can get through that in 30 to 40 minutes, something like that. But for most of the math students, it takes more like 45 to 60 minutes to get through it. If it's taking much longer than that, then maybe you have them placed too high in the program and they're struggling. So they really shouldn't be.
Because I'm going to play the devil's advocate a little bit here, right? So we do hear from a lot of our customers, Nicole, math is taking me an hour and a half, 2 hours, or I hear we've got tiers, and I always say, okay, once you've hit tiers, there's no learning going on anyway at that point. So we need to, so what do you say to families who have tried doing, 30 problems, but their kids are hitting, a wall around 15, maybe 20, and they say, yeah, that doesn't work for us to do it that way. It's my kids, it's taking them so long. They're getting upset. What do you say to parents who are in that situation?
There's a few things to say. One is, eventually, everybody will hit a wall. Eventually. I mean, eventually, not everybody is Albert Einstein, let's say, to use a name. So eventually, somebody's going to hit a wall, and where that wall is differs greatly, amongst individuals.
Yeah.
But they really shouldn't be hitting the wall at the middle school level. And if they are, it's probably they're just inadequately prepared, or they've been moved too fast, or They're trying to go faster than the student is ready to move. So the two most important elements, factors in math for students is one, proper placement, and two, appropriate pacing. Proper placement and appropriate pacing. So if they're placed too high, then they're going to be struggling right from the start. Right. And that does happen.
Yep.
And it especially happens in public schools, because if you're in the 8th grade, you're doing 8th grade level math. It doesn't matter if you're actually functioning at the 5th grade level, you're still doing 8th grade level math.
Correct.
Well, that doesn't have to happen for homeschool families. If they're functioning at the 5th grade level, you can put them in the 5th grade level. It doesn't matter if they're old enough to be an 8th grade level, 8th grader. So proper placement is really important. Yes. And then appropriate pacing is not pushing them to go too fast.
Yeah.
Or dragging them out to be too slow. So it's just with homeschooling, those two factors shouldn't be a problem. If a parent is willing to place the student where they actually belong, and there are placement tests available for Saxon Math, and if they're willing to let their child move along at an appropriate pace.
Yeah.
So for most students shouldn't be struggling. Yeah, there'll be new content. There'll be things that'll be kind of like hard to grasp, and they'll struggle with it for a little while.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be a struggle every day. And if that's the case, then either they're placed too high or they're being pushed too fast.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be taking, I mean, if you're going to be an advanced math book, even in schools with, college prep students, that might be taking them 2 hours a day or 2.5 hours. So they just split the lesson in two and do half one day and the other half the next day.
Right.
Exactly. So, I mean, when you get up to that level, then of course, it's going to be hard content and students are going to struggle.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't be struggling that much at the middle school level if they are properly placed and appropriately pacing.
Yeah. I mean,
I would still say do all of the problems.
Yes, that is for me. So I'll say two things regarding that. So I'll tell you again how we do it in my home, right? I mentioned I have a son who struggles with autism, right? And ADHD is a part of that. We have a lot of students in our community who have reading challenges like dyslexia or ADHD, and even students who don't, that, it takes us to do 15 problems plus the lesson practice. I'm at an hour. But what I do is I just split it in two. I go slower. We do every single lesson, every single problem. And sometimes it takes us maybe 3 days to do a lesson. And I keep telling people, what is the rush? We're not trying to get to some end goal that, okay, he only got 75% of it. I want him to know every single thing, and we're not moving on until he feels comfortable, because it's going to catch up to you at some point. So we'll do 15 today, 15 tomorrow, but we're doing every single one. And Amen. The other thing I say to people is, I have again, we got people who do everything. And at the end of the day, this is what I do think is important about homeschool, right? You're homeschooling, you are the person closest to your child. You know what your child needs. So I always put it back into the parent's hand, like you're the decision maker here. But I will tell you, we have seen students who start from the beginning doing every single problem, every single lesson. Those students, hands down, are good at math.
Right.
They just are. Why? Because they've had enough practice. I don't believe that it is like they're smarter than my kid. No, they've literally just had enough practice. When I moved my son to 20 minutes of piano practice a day instead of 10, he got better because he had more practice.
That's
That's
right.
the only thing that we changed. But as I will always say, this is the benefit of being a homeschooler. You know your student. You've heard from us. Here's the best way to get the best results out of this program. You still have to do what's going to work in your house. But just remember, there is no there's no treats at the end of the race, like there's no race. There's no, I have to get to the end by 12th grade at this level at this day. There is no end. The glory of homeschooling is be able to meet your child where they are at and teach to that.
If you gave the Saxon Math placement test to a large number of adults,
Yeah.
most of those adults would struggle at the Math 76 level. They wouldn't do well on the Math 76 placement test. They would probably be placed in Math 6.5.
Yeah.
Most of the adults. So if it takes you through 8th grade level to get really strong through the Math 7.6 book, your child is well ahead of most adults.
Yeah.
So just the way to have mercy on your child is not to shorten the amount of work that they're doing, but just go and place them properly and let them move at a pace that's comfortable for them, but do it all. Do it all. Now, there's just one more element that I don't know if very many homeschoolers do, but I think is really important. And that is the facts practice.
Okay.
The facts practice is, at the 3rd, 4th grade level, we're working on addition, subtraction, multiplication facts.
Yeah.
Then as we keep moving up, we keep doing multiplication facts. We keep doing multiplication facts all the way up through the 8th grade level. We're still doing multiplication facts because if your child doesn't instantly know the multiplication facts through 9 times 9, then they're going to slow down. And I mean, they should be able to complete 100 multiplication facts in under 3 minutes. And really, they should be able to do it under 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And if they really make use of their brains and memorize some of this content, it will really speed them up how much they can get done. Absolutely. So there are some things that, there's a little warm-up thing at the beginning of each lesson.
How do you feel about that?
It's mental math, problem solving, facts practice.
Okay.
I'm sure that most homeschoolers skip those things.
I think you were right.
I think mental math, students will get better and better at mental math with practice. I think it's a good skill, but it's not do or die.
Yeah.
Problem solving. For some of the students, they might actually enjoy some of those problem solving activities because they're non-routine problems. And I think it's good for them. And that's why it's in there. But if they don't do those, it's not do or die. And then the third one is facts practice. And then we suggest different things for facts practice.
Yes.
And if they don't do it, that is do or die.
Yeah.
That is do or die. Do the facts practice. And
let
you will find out that students will get through their problem sets faster because they've learned some of these basic routines and they're just so much faster at it now than they were before. So it's like an investment. You invest 4 minutes into a facts practice exercise and you get 10 minutes back at the other end because they're getting through the problem set that much faster.
Yes.
So it's worth doing it.
Yes. So let me tell our community, for those of you who don't know, on our online grading platform, we now have math facts practice. The part that you are talking about, we now have for all of the textbooks that have math facts practice. You'll find it online, so they can still just make it part of their day. We do know, I agree with you. A lot of people, I believe, skip those. I mean, particularly the warm-ups, we know about that. A fair amount of people do the math practice, but I know it's not for everyone. Or not everyone has been doing it. So we created a part of our system, so you now can do it in the system. And we also have, I think you and I talked about the program that I created called Drill Team, which is a fun way to get kids to learn their multiplication tables. It's just to help with that. In this day and age, like I remember my mom sitting with me at the kitchen table in the summer, drilling me on my multiplication tables. And she did it in a fun, musical way. So I didn't think that I wasn't having a great time. I thought this was just what you did in the summer. you know? So we created a program like that just to help kids musically learn and recite and drill, because I believe the drill has to happen to make it automatic, those math facts, those problems. So I'm with you. To put in the work up front, you won't have those problems down the line.
One of the capabilities that we have as human beings is to memorize things.
Yeah.
And for some reason, some of these reform educators denigrate memory, memory work. And so they call it, oh, it's drill, or just is blind, mindless drill, or the real, that wasn't effective enough to deter people. So then they call it drill and kill.
Right.
But that's not true. When they memorize these things, it's more like the thrill of skill. They get really good at it. And if you can speed it up, I'm a strong believer in timed written tests. Timed written tests, meaning you're trying to get through that facts practice faster than you did the day before, faster and faster and faster, so that you see 8 and 7. You don't hear in your head even 8 and 7. You just know it's 56 and you write it down as fast as you can. It's just the visual cue. You write the answer, go, 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 go. And there's something about doing that that just forces into the brain that you can't get some other way. We mentioned automaticity, or the word automaticity, to automate some of these things so that your brain doesn't have to think about it. Because math work is brain work. And so you talked about word problems earlier.
Yeah.
Well, how are you going to figure out how to solve a word problem if you're still struggling with basic multiplication facts, or if you've forgotten how to do long division, or, those things have to be automated. Just can be done without even thinking about it, so that your brain is freed up to look at the problem and to understand the language of the problem and to understand what kind of a problem this is. And that's the fun part of math. Once you can do that, and you don't even have to worry about these other things because you have already automated, these basic multiplication facts. I mean, you cannot be successful in middle school math if you don't have your multiplication facts down solid. I don't care if you do that one every day and don't do any other facts practice. At least do the multiplication facts.
People will tell us, my kid doesn't know their multiplication facts. Should I stop and learn them? My answer is, if they're a little older, because I literally have tutored a kid. I remember it was a high schooler. It broke my heart. And I think I asked her what 8 times 7 was. It might have been 9 times 8. And she got the calculator out to do it. And I was like, what happened here that got missed? Because she does not have the tools. We have to equip her with the tools to be successful in math. And that was, not a great thing. That didn't help her, that didn't help making them learn it. And I'm okay with you stopping and learning. Because again, I'm not on a train. I'm not on a train trying to hit, the platform by 5 o'clock. Like, get off the timeline, give them the tools that they need,
Right.
All right. I have one final question for you that was from one of our students. I love this question because I have created math problems. The student wants to know, how did you choose the names for the students in the word problems that you came up with? Because you always got to come up with new names.
Right.
So how did you do that?
Many of them are relatives. Not really, or former students. And, then it got to be, well, you have to have a much wider ethnic diversity here. And so then we started going through searches, or, I'm kind of a track aficionado. So I'll go through the track results. That's pretty wide ethnic distribution in track. And so I'll just go through lists.
Like track and field, like runners.
Yes. And so I'm getting these, I'm searching the results. Oh, there's a name I can add to my list of names to draw upon to create these word problems. So and just the word problems. I mean, these books are not real easy to write. a chapter book is easy to write. You write a chapter book, you're writing all the lessons on that topic in order. You're kind of in the flow, you're creating the lessons in order. You're taking step-by-step gains in difficulty or sophistication of the problems. So when you do all of that, you've finished a chapter book, like typical math book. And when I've done that, I feel like I'm about like 1/3 done with writing a book, because then you have to figure out, well, what's a good way of weaving these books lessons together so that there's enough space between, enough days between lessons on that topic, and what lesson in this topic is a prerequisite for a lesson in this topic, so that you get them in the right order. And then they're starting the review sets. And the review sets take a long time to write. And then what takes the longest is these word problems.
Yeah.
Because you want to be sure that these word problems are covering, the broad spectrum of content. And it just takes a long time to create these problems. And even coming up with names. So, yeah, so it's a tedious process, but on the other end, I think it really works for students to have had a program that's structured this way. And you're right, this applies not only to math, but it applies to language arts, science, social studies. This is how programs should be written, and the content should be practiced so that students do remember, and they do see how the connections, and they do build these concepts over time. And one of the tools that really leads to success for these homeschool families is what you're doing, because a lot of parents just don't really feel that that capable of helping their students through a math curriculum, especially as you climb through the series. So I'm so thankful that there are resources out there and people who do have some math awareness, math abilities, that are providing this help for students that will really increase the number of homeschool families that are producing really math capable kids, which means that they will have a lot of options open for their futures.
Yes, awesome. Well, I know for one, on behalf of our families, I want to thank you and John Saxon for all the work that you did, because I've been through every single problem that you have written backwards and forwards. So, I think you have created an awesome curriculum that really gives students not just that ability to know how to do a problem, but the ability to really understand how it's all connected, which I think is, when you can get to that level, it's pretty awesome. Like, I didn't get that when I was a kid, and I got it when I went through your material and taught it. So I thank you for all the work that you've done. It's been my pleasure, meeting you. As I said, I met you this summer, and I felt like when we met, like we were, when you feel like somebody who's part of your tribe, you've met them and you're like, yes, a fellow educator, you feel it in your bones, that you feel that connection. And I definitely felt that. So thank you so much for spending some time with me and our community today. And, we will continue to talk wonderful things about this incredible curriculum, so many, many more students can jump on board. And we're really creating a culture of learners, and of smart math learners, at any level, who can be really excited about learning and excited about math. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Nicole. I started writing for my own kids. I mean, that was the motivation, my own children. And so when homeschool families choose Saxon Math and have good success, it's just really fulfilling. It's the most fulfilling part of this job. Thank you.
All right. All right, everybody. We will see you next time. We're out.
Bye.
Bye-bye.